Alright guys, today we're going to be talking about the age of European absolutism. And one of the things you need to understand about the age of absolutism is that it was a dramatic change from the feudal era. Under feudalism, you guys don't get a whole lot of this, but under feudalism, the power really was not with the king. The power was really with your local lords, the nobility, the people who helped the king do what he wanted. Yes, most of those nobility paid taxes, etc. to the king. However, the real power in government did not lay with him. Okay? So you need to understand that. That's kind of the first thing. So European absolutism, what is it? Absolutism is a system of government in which the king himself or herself, if it's a queen, holds absolute or total control and total power. So what are a couple of characteristics of absolutism? One, it's centralized power. All of the power is within the hands of one person. Okay, all power lies within the king. The two guys we're going to mainly talk about here are Peter the Great of Russia and Louis XIV of France. And those guys exemplified centralized power. The people had very little say in government, essentially none whatsoever, and there was no democracy at all. We'll talk about it, absolutism in England, and how that really turns out pretty poorly for the kings in England. But in most of Europe, in the continental Europe, the people had very little say, and it went pretty well for a long time for the kings. On the other hand, the kings, in order to execute their plans and to do the things that they wanted to do, they had to form what are called large bureaucracies. A bureaucracy is a system of government in which you basically have people doing what you tell them to do. There are little small departments that take care of taxation, take care of land claims. And so in order to do their job, the king, as the head executive of a government, had to have the bureaucracies do the little things underneath him and to take care of her job. The easiest way to think about it is today, here in the United States, we have a bureaucracy to collect taxes, we have a bureaucracy to give stipends or subsidies to farmers. So this bureaucracy allowed for specialization in little jobs, and basically the government became very highly organized, and everyone owed their allegiance to the king, who held absolute and total power. Okay, another facet or characteristic of absolutism is the fact that kings built up these huge, large armies. Now, why do you need a large army? Well, if you're one person governing an entire kingdom, you're probably going to have a lot of people that don't like what you have to say. And so the way that they dealt with that is they built large armies. King Louis XIV had huge armies. In fact, at one point he melted down all the silver in the kingdom to help pay for his armies, and that didn't work out real well in the long run for France. But these huge armies allowed them to wage wars, to unify their people, to stir up nationalism and pride in their country to help them remain in power. Okay, those large armies weren't simply used just to have and put down revolts inside their countries, but they are also a facet or an aspect of it is conflict with others. Okay, during the age of absolutism, there are a lot of wars throughout Europe. If you'll remember and think back to the 30 Years' War. The 30 Years' War was kind of a precursor or something that happened immediately before the age of absolutism. And what you'll notice and what we'll talk about is how that ends up leading and helping to lead toward the age of absolutism. Within the country itself, you had nobility, wealthy people, merchants even sometimes, that would fight for the king's favor. Louis XIV had people that would try to get in and be with him at all times, because the closer you were to the person who had power, the more power and influence you have. And so that's another aspect of absolutism, is that you, and one of the things that kings actually wanted was that within their government, you actually had people fighting underneath you for your favor and for your ears, so to speak. So why did countries go to absolutism? Well, I mentioned earlier that under feudalism, the nobility really held all the power, and kings got kind of tired of this. And so kings became very mistrustful of nobility. Those would be people underneath them who owned smaller tracts of land but held really all the power because they controlled the real land. They became mistrustful of the church. Remember, in Europe, the Catholic Church still held a lot of power, still held a lot of land, and the kings did not like that. They wanted to take that power and that land for themselves. and also legislatures. There was a history of parliaments, of a small amount of democracy in most of Europe at the time. The time period we're talking about is the 16 and 1500s, 1600s, and into the early 1700s. There was a history of parliaments. There was a history of democracy, at least for the wealthy landowners, the nobility. Kings became mistrustful of that. They were seeing taxes be taken away and out of their money, and so they said, hey, why am I going to allow the nobility to collect taxes? So I'm going to take this money myself. Courts. They didn't like it when the courts decided against them, which is one of the things that happened to Louis XIV. They didn't like it when courts, they did not feel, rather, that they should be held accountable to the laws of the land. They said, no, that's not right. I'm above that. We are better than that. And so they began to distrust and not follow the court's rules. And they also said that, why should I allow someone else to make the laws of my country? Okay, why should I allow someone else to make the laws of my country? And so they began to do it all themselves. So what you're going to notice are three things. One, okay, kings start establishing their own taxes and their own tax system. Two, they start handpicking people to run the courts. And three, they essentially start making their own laws for themselves in their country. And so they really take a lot of control there. All right, another facet of absolutism, another reason for absolutism is called the theory of divine right. This is something we're going to read about tomorrow in class. But the theory of divine right essentially states that all power, all the king's power, is derived from God. They are their representatives. They are God's representative here on earth. And so as being God's representative of earth, God has ordained those leaders to lead us, and God has ordained those people to be theirs. Louis XIV was seen by his parents as a gift from God. And so Louis XIV really takes this, and in fact one of his nicknames was Louis the God-given. And so as that, they really say, hey, this guy is our representative from God. This is our, God gave us this gift for our country, so he must be his representative, his voice, and he really must have power directly from God himself. And so that is the theory of divine right in a nutshell.